Their
Radio. Their radio.
Early last year, I had the pleasure of being published alongside Lupita Limon Corales in Dryland Issue 11, which is now known as Sin Cesar. They are one of my favorite poets from Los Angeles who shows great love in their poems, with love simplicity, the complications, and everything in between. I had the pleasure of connecting with them and talking about Shakira, Audre Lorde, their poetic voice, trees as abolitionist allies, and why it's always safer to jaywalk. This conversation reminds me to continue being hopeful in this world, and that permission to create is never needed. We hope this conversation does the same for you. We would like to start out by sharing one of Lupita's poems titled Someone's Fulana.
Someone's Fulana. Mi tía wears the 7-Eleven polo with good English when she welcomes God's witness to her door. She's the assistant manager of the freeway overpass on the 10 East. She got papers from Reagan. Mi tía never gets papers. Mi tía braids herself into love letters, small, look, like this. Mi tía can't stop picking her face and wraps panic attacks in pink butcher paper. When mi tía argues in 2 languages, she never ever cries. Mi tía teaches mi tía to drive secretly while her husband's at work. Mi tía knows her rights with a red card in her purse. One day, mi tía takes the baby from my mother and teaches it to suck on English words. After her abortion, we weep, then we fall asleep. Mi tía sells spiderwebs by the dozen at the Foothill bus stop. Mi tía mails a suitcase of nieces' bras to other nieces. She updates her status with tears she would never say out loud. Mi tía would never marry a narco, and mi tía marries a narco. Mi tía buries prayers in the backyard with money that rots into the ground. Mi tía has a fantasy, her and Yaya in Mota fields. Soft legs slide together, Virgen pendant cool against her chest. ¿Te acuerdas? We used to say we'd never forget. Mi tía has created elaborate rituals of forgetting. She greets the archangels at 10:10. She scatters the ash at her door. When mi tía undresses the life on her fake ID, it says, Ya no llores, chula, que te vas a hacer fea. Mi tía falls asleep to the kitchen curtains on fire. I'm Lupita Limon Corales. I am a poet, educator, and interpreter, and landscaping assistant, and I do a lot of things, but poetry is like my lifelong love.
We began the interview speaking on sharing poems, validation outside of institutions, and learning how to deal with rejection.
I was working on my poetry and not sharing it for so many years, and it was just such a personal, intimate practice. And in the last few years, I started to share my work more through zines. I loved making zines because you didn't have to worry about any of approval or the co-signing of publishers, editors, institutions. I just was able to sit down in my room and type things out and collage things together and go to the print shop and make copies, and did that for many years. Like up until just about a year ago, that was the primary way that people were reading my work, and it was the same 40 people. Like every time I made a new zine, my 40 friends would come through and shoot me a few bucks. It did give me positive feedback, but I didn't really feel a lot of pressure to share beyond that because I felt like there was so much learning that I still had to do. And yeah, I think I wanted to become a better poet primarily. And so over the last year or two, I've tried to, push myself to share beyond just my friend groups. And at first it was really intimidating, but now it's been so fun and affirming. I get to make so many friends, like you and I are meeting through that. I get to see that some of the poems I don't really like, other people do. And sometimes my poems that are my favorite are like crickets for the audience. And that is just good information and shapes the way that I write. So I think because for so long I wasn't really looking for any type of formal approval or inclusion or publishing even, it just seems like an extra benefit to be able to do that now. And my good friend and roommate Mal, she always says that her goal each year is to get 10 rejections, because if you get 10 rejections, that means you at least apply to 10 things. And so far this year, I've gotten more rejections than ever, but also lots of opportunities, So I think every time that I do receive a rejection, I try to just frame it through that piece of advice of like, you have to try.
I think especially like poetry for me is because it is very personal, at least for me in the way that I write, that it sometimes does feel like, hurt. But then it brings up the question of like validation and who we're getting that validation from and who we want it from and who we don't want it from. You brought a really great point of also like, just putting yourself out there is also like a huge step that,
Mm-hmm.
that takes work.
Yeah, and I think if you can find ways to cultivate validation and belonging and connecting outside of being accepted for prizes or being published, then you can feel a lot more grounded in your work. Most of the time when I apply to things, I don't get it, but often I'll get something else. And it's usually through friends and people that I've built relationships with over the years who will put me on for a series that they're getting to curate as a part of their new job, or will invite me to read poems at their wedding, or, just these other fun creative ways of sharing work. I think I was pretty like anti-publishing for a moment, just wanted to be DIY, and maybe was closing myself off to the idea of becoming a part of like a literary world. I just had so much skepticism and I continue to carry that skepticism with me, and I really enjoy getting to share with more people and get resources out of it too, which is starting to happen.
Most definitely. I think carrying the skepticism just in anything is important because it's also like
Yes.
taking what you want from that instead of them taking everything from you. So I
Hmm.
definitely do think that that's an important thing to always carry, that skepticism. One of the things that I've noticed from reading your poetry, it's that it's very lyrical and it's very romantic. And even about the experiences you faced. I know one of the poems you spoke about a car crash. But I wanted to know, where did that poetic voice come from? And I know you've been writing since you were a child.
I don't know where it came from. My dad taught me how to read and write when I was 3 years old, and I was obsessed. And I didn't speak English yet. So my teachers didn't know that I was such an avid reader and writer, because I kind of was just delegated to the ESL group. And at home, I had such a rich literary life. My dad was really supportive of that, and I love to write like little poems in my notebook. I also as a kid was really obsessed with Shakira, and I was obsessed with Pies Descalzos and Donde Están los Ladrones, and I remember listening when I was like 7 or 8, just in bed. I was like writing or collaging or something, just like as a little kid, loved to be crafty, and was listening to one of her albums, and I remember feeling like existential for the first time. It was the first time that I felt like the weight of the world and the passing of time and the sadness of loss. Like I just felt all these emotions listening to her, and I really really like related to and appreciated her lyricism. I really like Audre Lorde. A lot of her writings about poetry I deeply identify with, and she writes about poetry as, a voice, almost like an ancestral voice, or it's something that's a part of you but also separate from you and deep inside, and carrying all of this knowledge and memory that we might not be consciously aware of. And I don't want to, it's hard not to, I guess, like I don't know. What I relate to about that is that when I'm writing poetry, I don't really know what I'm going to write. And it feels like a process of discovery. And it feels like a really intentional moment of sitting by myself and connecting with something deeper and bigger and longer. I'm just self-conscious about sounding too like, but yeah, to me, as someone who's extremely social and extremely connected to a lot of people and always in groups of friends and out in the world, to have a practice where I sit down and reflect and meditate and kind of turn inside is really, really special. And I often find myself feeling like I've connected to something.
At least for me, I feel like I take that approach to writing as well, to poetry, where I try to make that connection that I don't feel I make within my physical like interactions, you know? And I think especially connecting to the past and connecting to memories. For me, I feel like I stem from writing from memories and trying
Hmm.
to like, capture that feeling from those memories.
I'm sorry to counter interview you, but I want to know a little bit about where your voice comes from as a poet.
I think my voice, it definitely comes from just having these memories that I kind of remember them in a good way, or I try to remember them in a good way. Like for example, like helping my dad, helping him out, like working in these like different jobs that he had, like selling out of a van, in the back of a van. At the time, I didn't enjoy doing it, but in the way that I write poetry, it's like I don't focus on that anymore, but now I focus on the relationship that I built with my dad from doing that. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of tapping into these relationships that I wish I recognized at the time, even though I was a
Mm-hmm.
child. But it's like I'm knowing, and I'm helping to also better understand the relationship I have with my family and with my loved ones is through poetry, and kind of seeing that, that second side of that I don't usually see. When I think of the relationship I have with my parents, it's not the most interactive one in the way that it's like that I've seen other people have, but I still have that relationship because I write about them in a way that it's thoughtful, and it's not in a romantic way, but in a way that I know that our relationship stems from.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, and that makes me think too that memory and I think family and collective memory are a big part of where my voice comes from. And I'm often borrowing from words that someone in the family has used, or kind of remixing their stories, or coming across anecdotes and examples in books that I'm reading that feel really connected to what I'm trying to say. So, in some ways, I feel that my poetic voice is a collage of all of the people who I am living life with.
Another thing I know that you've mentioned that was an important experience for you was a position you had archiving political posters. And I know you had also mentioned in a previous interview how, that really changed the way you approached writing. So in what ways did that experience change the way you wrote?
As a part of my poli sci requirement, I had to do like a practical service learning internship type of thing. And so I did it at a political poster archive. I just literally typed in politics onto the career center website for my school. The website had a scan of Yolanda Lopez's artwork. Are you familiar? It's the one that says, "Who are you calling a pilgrim?" It was appropriating the imagery of those Uncle Sam military recruitment posters, and it was saying something like, "Who are you calling a pilgrim?" And it was a part of this exhibition called "No Human Being is Illegal." And so I'm undocumented, and at that time was very secretive about my status, as like we're raised to be. And I think I really was like sipping the dreamer Kool-Aid in a lot of ways, and was really used to seeing issues of immigration talked about in this really specific way, which was kind of like passive and liberal and individualistic and assimilationist. And so I checked out this website, and there was all of these posters that were the opposite. They were like angry and defiant and confrontational. And, I came across like Julio Salgado's work, who is an LA based and documented artist. And it was people with their middle fingers up, people closing doors on ICE agents. There was all of this like joy and anger that was a part of it. So getting to work with all of those posters, I was getting to handle these documents that were art and also history, that were showing that there was a fundraiser benefit dance party in Mexico City in 1970, whatever, that there was all of these undocumented artists in LA making work about being unafraid and unapologetic. There was posters that were just reflecting all of these political issues from all of these countries that I hadn't previously known existed. And that was really empowering to sort of see myself as someone within a larger history and a larger struggle and movement. And I had sort of known that before, but to be tangibly handling thousands and thousands of posters that are just a testament to that was really, really viscerally moving. I think what I learned through that experience was that one, a lot of my stories and a lot of my struggles were not just mine. They were connected to something a lot bigger and they were systemic. And so other people were experiencing these too. And when you grow up feeling like you have to be really quiet and really private about what you and your family are going through, it feels really good to see that you're actually connected to something and that it's not like this shameful, secret, individual burden to carry. And then two, just feeling so invigorated and challenged by all of these posters, it made me feel like I needed to connect to a lot of the organizing that was happening around me that I'd previously felt like an outsider of, or like it was foreign to me. It made me want to connect and become a lot more active and involved. Like I wanted to be like a real participant instead of just like a passive person that was letting things happen around me. And seeing that that had happened because of art was really transformative because like I said, I'd been writing all of my life and I always was into making things like poems and collages and little books. And I had thought of it as something really trivial, like a little hobby or something, not something worthy of my time and dedication. And, I was like, I have to be a lawyer. Like, I have to be something that will make it worth it for my parents to have gone through all this. And so I think one of the biggest ways that that experience supported my writing was by showing me the importance of documenting documenting each other, of being willing to insert yourself into history and into the public imagination, and how it isn't trivial to make art, and it is part of how we build movements and a part of how we communicate with each other and counter all of this silence and shame, and that is actually not just theoretically important, but that it changes the course of people's lives, and made me feel like it was important for me to actually pursue and share poetry.
Yeah, most definitely. And I completely feel that, especially as somebody who's doing audio, because in a way, this is also archiving. That's the way I've
Yeah,
also
for
got
sure.
involved with audio, was because it was these archiving of conversations that were happening within spaces, and also conversations that are happening at any time. Another thing that I saw from a different interview, which is the Lower Grand interview, not an interview, sorry, you shared a few poems in
Mhm.
Spit in the Ocean through Lower Grand Radio, and you shared your poem La Sinaloense, but your mom shared it. And I thought
Mhm.
that was really cool. But I wanted to ask, why was it important for you to have your mom share that poem?
One is that my mom has been one of my greatest muses, for years. She'll like roll her eyes and be like, "Ugh, you're writing about me again." Like bien creída, because she has all these poems written about her. But my mom is just an extremely, extremely magical person, and relationships with parents are extremely complicated. And ours also is. But she is one of my best friends and biggest supporters, and that's so special. All my life, she has made me feel like I'm extremely valuable and worthy and lovable, and that I should do whatever I want and succeed in whatever I want. And that she made all of these sacrifices so that I could live a life that she couldn't. But she's not controlling or disappointed in the ways that I move, even if they're outside of what she might have expected, So it's really special to me to just be able to have this relationship with her. And she's such a badass. She has a lot of really, really hilarious stories, and a lot of them show up throughout my work. And I'm extremely inspired by her audacity and her bravery. That poem, La Sinaloense, was inspired by her and my aunt. We got really, really drunk on Christmas a few years ago. And then the next morning we went up we spend Christmas up in Watsonville, which is a few hours up north from LA. And then often we'll go up to San Francisco in the same trip, just like walk around and get some food. So we were driving up to San Francisco, but I was so hungover that I just had to keep asking that we pull over so I could puke. And I was literally like crying and filled with shame. I was like, I'm so sorry I let all you guys down. And everybody was like, what the hell are you talking about? We're all hungover. We had a great time last night. There's nothing to be afraid of or nothing to feel bad about. Like, let's go. Close the door and let's keep it moving. So I thought it was so special because that's kind of a lesson that my mom is constantly trying to show me. Yeah, that poem is just the first line, no eres payasa para andar entreteniendo. That's something that she's always told me over and over again. Whenever I'm like, I'm not being fun enough, I'm not being a good host, I feel low energy. She's like, okay, you're not a clown. Like, just chill. So I asked her to read that poem because it is really written from her voice and because I wanted to be able to involve more than just my voice in the recording for Spit in the Ocean. Like I said, when I'm writing poems and sitting down and making my little zines and everything, like it's just me writing, and it's nice to have a really personal individual practice like that. But most of my life is about the people around me, and my relationships and my communities are so important that it felt important to add other voices and textures to the audio. And so I invited my mom to read that poem. She also said she would only participate if she could read a poem in Spanish. And that was my only Spanish poem. But, I also included a couple of other friends on there. My friend Shabina, who's one of my longtime friends and thought partners that has taught me so much about what it means to show up for each other and how to throw down in LA. And then my friend Sam, who is also a longtime friend. We grew up in the same hometown, and she's my former roommate, and she's an astrologer and my good friend. She was sharing Chumash creation stories along the Kern River on a camping trip recently. So I wanted to be able to include the voices of these like amazing people in the recording.
The next question I had was really about the first poem I read about from you, which was "A Car Crash Is Not a Poem," and I read it, and I also saw that you had said something about it, which is, well, what really captivated me was the first few lines that you wrote for that poem, which is, if I may share it, you had said, "The safest place to cross the street is wherever it's illegal." And at first, when I first read that, I was like, "Damn, like that's deep." But then but then you had mentioned in another post that it was like, "No, that like that's real. Like that really is true."
Yeah.
But then you had also said it is a poetic proof that laws are irrelevant, and it feels proof that the world is by design a dangerous place too. So I wanted to ask if you could tell me more about this poem and the ways it helps build on creating and imagining a world.
I wrote that poem after getting hit by a car in a crosswalk at a green light as a pedestrian. And it's actually the third time in my life that I got hit by a car. When I was 4 years old, my mom was crossing the street with me and my brother in like a little shopping cart. And actually, she's the one that got hit in the crosswalk. But me and my brother fell out into the street, and we had to ride home in an ambulance with her. Then, when I was I think 20 years old, I was riding my bike in Venice to work. I used to work in Culver City. And again, at a crosswalk, at a green light, I got hit by a car when I was on my bike. And then this third time in the summer of 2020, I was walking around my neighborhood, eating a paleta, and I was crossing the street. Looked both ways. It's a green light. A car comes out of nowhere and hits me. And that one really messed me up. I've been having a lot of like pain and also just emotionally, I couldn't go on my daily walks anymore because I was so scared. Every like sudden movement like freaked me out. But something that I had learned, I did this city planning program at UC Berkeley one summer because I sort of wanted to be a city planner or learn more about transportation planning in particular. I didn't drive for a really, really long time. I just got around LA on the bus and metro, which is extremely hard. So I was ride or die about it. I was like, I will never have a car. But now I have a car. I love my car. I love crying in my car, singing in my car. But yeah, I did this city planning program and I learned that statistically, most pedestrian deaths happen in a crosswalk. And that even though that's where we are asked to cross, it's way safer to illegally jaywalk because when you jaywalk, you only have to look out for two directions. When you are crossing at an intersection, even if you have a green light, there's so many directions that the car can come from. There's four directions that cars are driving, but people are turning around every corner. And so you can just get hit at any point. And that was something that I really got stuck on, again, as like, I mean, I guess as an undocumented person, but just as somebody who's like attuned to all of the injustices in the world that we're living in and the way that our entire lives are set up and revolve around death, unfortunately. It's like capitalism is actively trying to kill us every day. It just was such a perfect encapsulation of that even though there's the safer way to do things, that's the criminalized way. And then the way that we are allowed to move, there's a good chance that you might get hit 3 times in your life by a car doing that. So I also was really struggling. I'm a poet and very superstitious. I'm trying not to be too superstitious right now, but it felt like, what are the chances that I would get hit by a car 3 times? So I wrote that poem thinking about a lot of different things, about legality and about the built environment, but also about this urge that I had to make a poem out of it, and this urge that I had to make meaning out of it. But there's not really any meaning. You just cross the street and a car hits you, and you could just die at any moment. And there's a limited amount of thinking and writing that you can do. In terms of imagining or creating new worlds, I think that I'm, just interested in sort of unlodging the ways that we think and the way that I think in particular about what the world can and should be. I am thankful that over the years, so many people have taught me so much and that I've been able to revise a lot of the ideas that I had when I was younger. I was I felt a lot of pressure to really like follow rules, but also break rules. Like I talk about this a lot. Like if your mom is like lie to the police, but also like never do anything wrong, it there's a lot of chaos that goes on in your head. You're like having to like memorize names on people's fake IDs and having to like look out through the back window to see if there's a cop car nearby. But at the same time, it's like if you ever break a rule or get caught slipping, like our whole family's future could just like be thrown away. That's made it sometimes hard for me to be as brave as I want to be. And so I like to write. Sometimes when I write, it's not because that's exactly what I think yet, but that's how I want to think. And I want to put it down somewhere to remind myself. So in a lot of my poems, I'm like, be braver, be bolder, don't follow the rules. And that's something that I want to embody more.
And another thing I think that is connected with that was another poem you wrote, which was Dentist off Juanita Avenue. But I definitely want to hear more about the poem, about just like, you spoke about illegality, but also just like how people just go about, what they know and their knowledge and practicing it without permission.
I wrote based on my dentist when I was in high school. I haven't really had health or dental insurance for most of my life, but there was a dentist that my mom met like at the gym or something. And he was an immigrant who in his home country was a licensed and practicing dentist, and then those licenses don't apply when you migrate here because there's just different criteria and a different process and all that. So he continued to practice dentistry here in the US, just low key in his house. And that meant that he was able to offer really affordable prices. And so I think a lot of his clientele was like people that couldn't access health and dental insurance for whatever reason. And so that's how I got braces. And me and my brother would go every month, enter like his just regular house, like on this little cul-de-sac over in the San Gabriel Valley. And it looked like a real ass dental office. Like it was just like it had that smell. It was really sterile and just like white and shiny. And he just had, I mean, it was legit as hell. And so I would get my braces tightened there every month. And unfortunately, halfway through the time when I had braces, his neighbor called the police on him, and all of his stuff got confiscated. And I think he might have had to serve some jail time as well. And we couldn't get our braces tightened for a while, which was a mess. And when he did come back, he continued to work with the clients that he had started working with, but he had gotten everything confiscated. Again, I think for some of us, it's really easy to think about ways of getting our needs met outside of the system. And that to me was an example of that, of like this underground way of doing things and these like relationships and histories and homes. Like I was in this person's home, he was in my mouth, and which I won't bore you with the details, but dentist stuff is like there's a lot of drama about dental stuff in my childhood. So it just felt like very intimate and really forbidden. But at the end of the day, it's something that's actually just really routine and mundane, which is like getting your teeth cleaned.
Dentist off Juanita Avenue. My mouth in grief over rotten milk teeth and lost silver crowns, my gums sliced open like fruit. In my mouth, a hand curls its tiny mirror, vague cologne and latex scents, the hand trained in other countries. In the greenhouse on the cul-de-sac, in the living room office, sterile and white, X-rays and grinders live beside fruit magnets and framed portraits down the hall. In those chambers where he loves, ages, sleeps, and dreams, he carefully and illegally cleans my twisted teeth, his homesick hand, my haunted mouth, each one of us persisting.
But it very much goes to show that, regardless whether there's laws or there isn't, people will continue to practice what they know.
Exactly.
And I think that's the great part of it, where it's just like there's so much knowledge around us that doesn't need permission. And I definitely take from that as well when I think of rejection from literary journals and things. It's just like the rejection has always been there. So what is there to lose,
With the pandemic and with the like uncertainty about the future, like I'm pretty apocalyptic, so I'm constantly like, everything's gonna fall apart, and we're gonna have to like innovate really quickly and figure out ways to reorganize ourselves, because it's not seeming like the way we're living right now is going to be sustainable for much longer, and never really was. So I love to tap into this tradition of like living collectively, living without permission, finding ways to help each other out outside of what's been allowed.
So I read that your dad works with trees, and I've also read that you've helped him out from the second poem in Dryland. And then you've also wrote an essay titled "There Are Trees in the Future, or a Case for Staying." And you also spoke about Daniel, who was working with trees. So I do see there's a lot of connection with trees in a lot of your writing. So I wanted to ask, what role do trees play in your life?
Since I was a little kid, my dad's been an arbolero. So when he first migrated here, he was just learning. He was almost an apprentice to my uncles, who had their own hustle out here before he migrated, and then now has his own company and has been doing this for a really long time. But trees were just such a part of like my
daily life in this really, really visceral way, where my dad was always just covered in leaves and covered in dirt and, trudging in like mud and debris on his work boots, and his whole life and mind revolves around trees. Like when you drive around with him anywhere, he's just pointing, oh, look at that tree. Oh, look at that tree. Oh, me and your uncle did that one. Oh, that one's looking a little weird. I'm going to have to call that person and tell them that we got to come back. Oh, did you know that that tree is this, this, and this? And my dad is not a very enthusiastic person about anything. He's like, he hates everything, honestly. So the fact that he's so happy when it comes to trees means that and I'm such a daddy's girl, um and I'm always craving for him to be happy about something to me. It's it's really special, and him and I have a really complicated relationship that I don't want to talk too much about, but we were sort of like estranged for a while, and when we started to rebuild our relationship, it was through me working with him and just helping out with the tree business. And when I was young, I would sometimes help out by answering the phone calls because I spoke English and he didn't. But recently I was like, no, I want to help out by actually like learning how to do what you do. And I'm like a woman, so my boy cousins and my brother always got invited to be a part of that, but I never did. And so I started working with him recently, and it was a really, really special way to rebuild our relationship. I talked to my therapist about it, and she was like, that sounds amazing. That sounds like if you have a difficult relationship with someone, the best way to rebuild something is outdoors with trees, with greenery. Like it's literally like soothing to your nervous system. It's hard to be mad and go off when you're just like next to trees. To know that there's all of these trees outside that just like soothe your nervous system, that like heal you, that provide homes for people, like for the birds and the squirrels, and like have paid for my whole life basically through my dad. And also I was reading recently about how the more trees that there is in a neighborhood, the more shade that there is, which means it's less hot. And when there's less heat, there's less agitation and less crime and harm. And actually, like, having trees is a way to support public safety. And that there's like in Protean magazine, which is where my piece was published, they published an essay about trees as like abolitionist allies, and it talks a lot about the science behind that. But there's so much symbolism in trees. I think one thing that I really appreciate about them is that is that they're just old, like they're old, and they're big and they're sturdy. And I think in our daily lives we are encouraged to identify with and appreciate things that are like fleeting and small, and developers are coming and like pulling big ass trees out because they're in their way of their housing, condo, swimming pool plans. And I want to live in a way that honors these really big, old parts of our environment. Yeah, there's a book that I recently read about the disappearance of rituals. It talks about how you need these stabilizing, you need things to stabilize you in the world. You need to find ways to make a home in the world. When you're always identifying with yourself and with your interior emotions and your interior psychology, things seem so crazy. But when you can cling on to like real big eternal structures out in the world, which like for me are like mountains and rivers and trees, there's a way that you can like breathe and feel at home. Everything might be rapidly transforming around you and out of your control, but there's just certain like grounding forces. And to me, it's trees. Choreography for a car across the basin. Merging left, I look for the pear tree we dug into our handmade terrace above the 110 North. Oh look, someone's working on top of our work, and I miss my homebound spiral. Growing up in the carpool lane, mi pa points across his spiderweb freeway at trees he planted or at emptiness he carved in the place of a tree. I get it. To touch and belong to the canyons, to look so at home in traffic. Here our homes are always brief, wiped clean like an 8-hour shift. I pick up all the branches, then open my arms to start over again. See the rhythm of surviving. See the burial my living makes on days beneath it. Between evictions, I rearrange my bedroom to pass the time, and outdoors you're waiting for me at our bug-out meetup spot. Until then, what do I count on? Concrete rooms adorned by other hands, a haunted river, a sunset to return to. Cement is a turtle shell, and she's made of nature too.
So one of the last few questions that I have is, what do you hope your writing does for others?
I would like for people to feel like they could write poems and they could share their stories and they could see the value and worth of the symbols and mythologies of their families and friends' lives. And I also think that like poetry can be medicine, and I love to read poetry because it's slower and deeper and looser than most of the things that I engage with in the day to day. I like to get to enjoy ambiguity and fluidity and have things not be so clear cut. And I hope that my poems could do that for people, and that people get to connect with the histories that I'm a part of, like my family, the histories here in Los Angeles. Yeah, I want to like people to feel, honestly, unfortunately, my poems are kind of optimistic. Like they're usually life affirming, which I love to be a hater sometimes too, you know what I'm saying? But I do feel like poetry is a space where I could be imaginative and open. And Miriam Kaba, one of my favorite abolitionist thinkers, is she says hope is a discipline, you know, and I feel like for me poetry is a place where I can test out hope and faith. Maybe it's naive, but I think it's important to have a place where we're sort of practicing like optimism.
Thank you to Lupita for joining me here on the show. If you'd like to know more about Lupita, follow them on Twitter at tree_apprentice.